You're listening to the Infinite Banking Mastery Podcast. Did you know that you could build a tax-free pool of wealth that's liquid and accessible all your life while building your retirement nest egg? Gain full control of your financial future and stop relying on the government and banks. The wealthy have already discovered this wealth-building secret. Now it's your turn to get financially secure without following the conventional wisdom that keeps you in debt to banks. Now here's your host, Valerie LaRocque.
Well, hello everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. Thank you so much for listening in. Today I wanted to cover the topic of long-term care. I know this is a confusing topic for a lot of people that I've spoken to. They sometimes get it confused with long-term disability. And I wanted to just cover it so you have an understanding of what it actually is and how it does play into your overall plan and your infinite banking plan, your retirement plan. So I wanted to get into that and describe a little bit more about what this coverage even is. And so this coverage usually is something that you would acquire in your older years, in your elderly years. Or I wouldn't say acquire it in your elderly years. I would say it normally is something that would pay you in your elderly years. You do want to acquire it before you're elderly, as it is just more and more expensive the older you get, and also harder to qualify for the older that you get. So I would say the best case scenario would be having long-term disability, which can cover up to age 65, age 67, or age 70, depending on how long you want that benefit to pay out. And you also can have shorter time frames. But then at that time, that long-term disability will go away because it's only meant to replace your income while you are earning an income during your working years. Long-term care then kicks in if you have that coverage. It will kick in your elderly years if you come to a time when you have a hard time doing things, if you become really sick and hurt and are unable to do what is called the activities of daily living. So the long-term care coverage will normally kick in, or you would qualify for that benefit if you were unable to perform 2 out of the 6 activities of daily living. And so it's different than long-term disability, because with long-term disability, simply you need a doctor who can say, you're not able to work right now. You are too sick or too hurt to work. And then you would be able to get your disability benefit to kick in and start paying you benefits. Long-term disability needs clarification that you are unable to do 2 out of these 6 activities of daily living. So I'm going to cover those 6. The first one is transferring. So are you able to walk, sit, stand, lie down, get up, climb stairs, things like that? It's looking at just transferring from one place to the next. Bathing is one of the activities of daily living. Toileting, which is the whole process of using the bathroom. Continence, which is bladder or bowel control. Dressing yourself, getting yourself ready for the day. And feeding. This is the actual process of eating rather than cooking the meal and preparing the meal for yourself. So now these things are just considered basic activities of living independently. And so if you're unable to perform 2 out of these 6 ADLs, and that stands for activities of daily living, that's how you would trigger the benefits on a long-term care contract. Or if you were to have a severe cognitive impairment, such as dementia, you would also trigger your benefit with just that one thing instead of needing to be unable to do 2 out of the 6 ADLs. So those same triggers would also trigger benefits on a whole life policy if you have that chronic rider on your policy. At least that's what it's called with some companies. If you were unable to perform 2 out of the 6 ADLs, you would be able to trigger that rider, and it would allow you access to a portion of your death benefit. So this rider may be called different things with different companies, and certainly not all whole life contracts with all companies necessarily are automatically issued with this rider either. So you have to just learn about your contract when you are receiving it or applying for it or talking to an advisor about it to find out if a rider like this comes attached to your policy. So I said in my last podcast episode that medical bills are the number one reason for bankruptcy in America. Well, that carries right on into your retirement years. And so if you successfully save for those retirement years, and then become unable to perform 2 of those 6 ADLs, the activities of daily living, or get dementia, something terrible, that will absolutely, very quickly and easily wipe out your retirement funds in a hurry. So years ago, when I was working at Merrill Lynch, and I was a financial advisor there, and I got to be there in 2008. And some of you maybe have remembered this from my first podcast episode. But when I was there in 2008 and got to see the market really tank and what happened with people and people freaking out and people that thought they could retire tomorrow suddenly felt like they could never retire because they didn't know how long it would take for their accounts to recover or if they would continue going down. In that moment, I thought, how am I really helping people here? Because I can do my best job, doing my due diligence and making sure that we are looking at their investments the best way possible and all of that. But the fact is, I didn't know how I would confidently and successfully help my clients reach their retirement goals when I didn't know what was going to happen tomorrow, and neither did anybody else. So for a brief time, I stepped away and I went to work for one of my clients who owned a ton of assisted living communities, and I helped people move into assisted living. And let me tell you, expensive. And also at that time when the market had just tanked, there was also the catastrophe of people who lived in assisted living and who had been there for years and called it home. Suddenly their accounts were dwindling down really fast and they didn't know how they were going to be able to afford to stay in their home. So that was pretty traumatic as well. And actually, right now, I happen to be a trustee for a person, for a beneficiary, and I pay her income from the trust. I pay for her bills. I pay for her caregivers because she happens to need assistance and caregivers right now. And she doesn't have any long-term care. So we are paying it from the trust. And, when I tried to talk to her and her husband long ago, they didn't feel that they needed any long-term care. And so they did not acquire it. And now we are just paying directly for it from the trust. And let me tell you, that care is expensive. It's been about an average, I would say, of about $15,000 to $20,000 a month. And she actually doesn't even need that much care. She doesn't have that high of a level of care need. But one time, after she had just had a surgery and she had to rest at home and she was just doing really rough after that surgery, it was hard on her. So we had the caregivers there and they were up with her overnight for about a month while she was struggling to heal from that surgery. That cost was over $34,000 in 1 month to have those caregivers there. So she's doing a little better. We've actually limited her care a little bit. So she has someone there maybe 3 to 4 days a week, 8 to 10 hours. The care is about $10,000 to $12,000 a month. And at one point, she had looked into just moving into an assisted living community and getting her care there. And that cost was around $15,000 a month when we looked into it years ago, and also required a large lump sum to move in the first place because it was kind of a nice assisted living community, which of course I'm sure is something you would prefer. You're not going to want the worst assisted living community when you're in your elderly years. You're going to want to have a nice place to live. And so that requires outside funds. It's not going to come from Medicare or Medicaid, what people might think. Certainly you can get help from Medicaid, but you have to be basically completely broke to be able to get care and help like that from Medicaid. You'll have to spend through all your assets basically, and then you would get help from Medicaid, and it's not going to be the best care. And if you end up having to go to an assisted living type community or skilled nursing facility and you're on Medicaid, it's not going to be great. You're going to really wish you had outside funds to help fund a better location for you. So basically, you want to be able to choose. You want to be able to choose if you are going to go to an assisted living community or be home and have someone come and help care for you at your own home. You just want to be able to make that choice. And I can't tell you how many stories I've heard from colleagues in the industry who have had clients who didn't think that they needed this protection and didn't get it, and because they had millions of dollars and they were fine, and then ended up completely wiped out and were unable to leave any kind of legacy to their children, and were struggling in the end. It's just really a sad story when something like that happens. So I'm here to help you think about this. Like, just have you ever thought about it? Have you ever thought about how much you would need to self-fund your care? What if you were to need this kind of care? What is your solution? You may think it will never happen to you, but what if it does? Are you prepared if it does? What's your plan? I mean, do you plan to just move in with your kids? This is a plan a lot of people have. Sometimes they're working. Like, another story from the assisted living communities when I was there, people would bring in their parents and the parents didn't want to come and they felt unloved and they were upset. But these parents sometimes were 90, 95, in their 80s, late 80s, and their children were in their 60s and still working. And some of these soon-to-be residents couldn't take care of themselves. They needed help. They needed help with some of those activities of daily living that I went over. So they needed someone to be there with them all day. Or some dementia patients would wander off. They'd wander off sometimes without clothes into the middle of the road. And so the kids were concerned, and if they're still working, they can't be there to be the eyes and arms and hands for their parents to help them so constantly with their needs. So the kids oftentimes were heartbroken as well because they wanted to be able to keep their parent home with them, but they simply couldn't with their need to go to work and how high of a need the parent had. So sometimes that plan doesn't work out. Well, I barely touched the surface on this topic, so I am going to come back to it next week. But I do want you to think about it. You start up a whole life policy, you start implementing the infinite banking concept, and maybe you end up even with a system of policies. Maybe you have more than one. And all throughout your life, you're using these policies, but ultimately they are there for you to use again in your retirement years. So of course, you'll have the use of these things all throughout your life to finance the things you need or the investments or the real estate that you want to invest in. But at the end of the day, it's great to have that money paid back in and to be growing well and everything so that you can use it in your retirement years. So yes, you absolutely have this very cool safety net of accessing a portion of that death benefit in the event of a long-term care need, depending on the company, and make sure you have that rider on your policy. I can't say it's for all policies, but it is very cool that you have access to that. And that certainly is great, and it's better than nothing, and it can really come in handy. But what if that long-term care need is a massive need? What will it deplete those funds that were meant for your retirement needs? And those retirement needs could certainly include some form of help here and there, but constant help or a large care need and needing to have this constant caregiver coming over all the time or needing to move somewhere, that is a massive need and can deplete funds quickly, even 50% of your death benefit if that's what you have access to at the time. It is possible. It just depends on how long you're living with this health conditions and this difficulty. So if you achieve a massive infinite banking system, that very well may be all that you need to hedge that long-term care risk to be able to fund that expense with your policies. But you can also further protect yourself in this area. That is for sure. Okay. So I'm going to come back to this topic next week for sure. But until then, if you feel I can help you in your current situation and you would like to work together, I would love to connect. Just go ahead and reach out to me directly. That's Valerie at alphaomegawealth.com. As always, thank you so much for tuning in to the podcast. I look forward to sharing with you again next week.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.